To discuss the connection between urban agriculture and social justice, here's co-founder of the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network, Malik Yakini, Executive Director of DC Greens, Lauren Schwader-Beal, co-founder of Black Urban Growers, Karen Washington, and panel moderator, Michael Ham.
Well, good morning, everybody, again. Good to see you all. So just so that everybody knows, for these panels, since we have 30 minutes, maybe 27 at this point, something like that, what we've agreed to is that each panelist is going to take about 5 minutes to talk about whatever they want to talk about, so that we have 15 minutes for Q&A. So please feel free to go into Pigeonhole, start writing questions in, voting for the questions you like, so we see what pops up and we can take 15 minutes to talk, okay? Malik, do you want to start?
Okay,
sure.
So first, good afternoon, good morning. I want to start by saying that Black Lives Matter, and also Black Farmers Matter, and Black land ownership, both in the rural context and in the urban context, matters. So I'm coming from Detroit, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network, but also I want to bring greetings from the National Black Food and Justice Alliance. And both of those organizations are dedicated to justice and equity within the food system. So specifically, we're here today to talk about the Farm Bill and the Urban Ag Act. And we're very concerned that as we roll this act out, that we do it from a lens of how we create justice and equity, because certainly that doesn't exist right now. In fact, we have centuries of structural racism that we're working against. And so as we're trying to put in place programs to empower urban farmers, we have to do it from a lens that recognizes that history of structural racism. We're still functioning in this society with a system of white supremacy that gives privilege to people who have white skin. And within that system, Black and brown farmers are marginalized. So in Detroit, some very unique things are going on, and I want to give a shout out to my colleague, Ashley Atkinson, who's in the audience, representing Keep Growing Detroit. And the organization she represents, along with the organization I represent and several others, are doing incredible things in the city of Detroit. In fact, Detroit is often called the leader of urban agriculture. We have more than 1,500 community gardens, school gardens, side lot gardens, and small farms in the city of Detroit that are producing a huge amount of fruits and vegetables. We still have great potential, greater potential that we can fill given the amount of space that we have in the city of Detroit, but nonetheless, we're producing a huge amount and also training new farmers each year to step into these entry-level jobs that are being created in urban agriculture in the city of Detroit. So we're interested in fact, I had a chance on the plane here to read the Urban Ag Act, and it seems to be comprehensive and seems to be a very good bill. Of course, it's in the implementation often of these things that the shortcomings become more apparent. So some of the things that we'd be interested in seeing as this bill moves through is increased funding for training and retention of urban farmers, including things like multi-year paid internships, training in all of the kind of mechanics and strategies of farming, as well as farm management. That's something that's very important. And then also we think that racial justice and equity training needs to be an embedded part of any program which rolls out, which seeks to expand urban agriculture. Because what we see in many cities is populations of color, but often we see nonprofits, white-led nonprofits, or many times well-meaning white individual farmers moving into communities of color and often getting resources that the majority population doesn't have. So we want to make sure that we have racial justice and equity training so that whatever happens in cities proceeds from that viewpoint. Also something that's very important is we talk a lot about the growers themselves, but developing the infrastructure to support those growers is important. And so that's already actually been mentioned this morning, but things like funding for wash, pack, and cooling stations, aggregation centers, and the infrastructure to provide for distribution is very important. And then of course, although we can grow food in buildings, and I think there'll be some discussion on that today, most food is still grown on land. So land access and water access is critical. So I live in a city where we have approximately a third of the city's 139 square miles, which is vacant land. So we have tremendous opportunities for access to that land. But unfortunately, because we live in a capitalist system, which is driven by the profit motive primarily, what we see in the city of Detroit is often these huge tracts of land are being sold to usually wealthy white men. And I intentionally use those three terms because it speaks to both class, so-called race, and gender, and three of the ways in which oppression manifests. So we're concerned that as we roll out programs for more robust urban agriculture, that we also have programs that ensure equitable access to land so that farmers can have the land to actually do the growing on.
Great, thank you. Lauren?
Great, well, thank you so much for those remarks. And it's such an honor to be on this panel with these leaders in the urban agriculture movement. It's a privilege to be able to speak to this next Farm Bill as well. I want to pick up a little bit where you left off. I think it's really important that as we are talking more and more about policies to support urban agriculture, that we remember that this is not unrelated to housing. And that, you know, in many cities across the country, the presence of urban agriculture has become sort of a front runner for displacement. It's the front edge of, you know, neighborhood beautification, which is really code for you're not going to be able to find affordable housing anymore pretty soon. Property taxes are going up, people are going to be displaced. And so I think it's very important that we be clear-eyed about that we look to the examples that we've seen historically in places like Detroit, where there is this you know, concern that, you know, coming down the pike, these wealthy white men could potentially be taking up some of these resources, and that has the potential to really be incredibly detrimental to people's ability to even stay in the places. I think, you know, to that same point, it's very important that as urban agriculture legislation is implemented, that we make sure that there really are very robust set-asides for what the USDA calls the socially disadvantaged groups. And, you know, in the urban ag setting, I think it's important to also be thinking about a category about long-term residents. That's not something that usually is brought up in terms of how set-asides are put in place, but remembering that this really has the potential to be, you know, opening this Pandora's box of displacement. We need to be sure that there are mechanisms, to your point, mechanisms to really ensure that folks that have been living in these spaces are able to stay and have ownership of the land and of the resources that are there. In DC, you know, we have a different situation than some other cities. You know, we don't have a lot of available land. The cost of land is very, very high. And I think it's important that we remember that not all urban agriculture is doing the same work, and that, you know, a lot of times people are talking about urban agriculture in terms of food security. And in a place like DC, I really feel like that is doing an immense disservice to the concept of food security to suggest that the, you know, food that is going to be grown on a very small piece of land is actually going to meet the food security needs of the population, which are dramatic in DC and across the country. And so I think it's important that we remember that employment is a very important component of this, which, you know, is the sort of back end. If people are not living in poverty, they are able to afford food. They don't have food security issues anymore. And so remembering that value-added producer grants are an important piece to extend to urban agriculture. That's something that is in place for rural farmers, where they can, you know, do vertical integration, where they can start, you know, creating jams. And, you know, in a place like DC, you know, that just produces more employment opportunities. And I think it's critical that that be a piece of the legislation. I also would just like to add, because we're doing our bullets, am I close to out of time?
You're okay.
Okay. There's often incentives for urban growers to make donations to, you know, food pantries. That's sort of a classic thing that often comes up in municipal and federal legislation. I think we need to be considering some kind of mechanism for urban growers to be able to donate their food to small community entrepreneurs that are trying to get their feet under them. If you have somebody who wants to be making her grandma's zucchini bread recipe, and in DC we have the Cottage Food Act that allows for folks to have to be able to enter the formal economy if they're making less than $25,000 and have less regulation on them. But if some of the food that's grown in these urban ag spaces can be donated to defray some of those startup costs, those testing costs, I really think that these spaces can be really valuable drivers in allowing community members to enter the formal food economy and really have ownership over the entire food economy and not just the urban ag spaces. I'll leave it there for now.
Cool, great. And Karen?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me. Make sure I put my stuff on bullet points because I want to make sure I got a lot to say. First, I want to echo Malik that Black Lives Matter, Black farmers' lives matter. Tribute to both our Black farmers, both past and present, and the fact that we're going to have the Black Farmers Conference in New York, November 5th. Be there or be squared. So some of the points I want to bring up is number one, we do have an aging population. The average age of a farmer is 57.5 years of age. Globally, urban ag, people are moving into urban cities, and so by 2030, 9 billion worldwide will be coming into cities, and half of the population in the United States will double. Land in urban areas are again being confronted because there is a need for housing, which is important, and we have to understand that 90% of the farmers in this country, 9% of the farmers in the country are Black. So what would I like to see in the Farm Bill? Number one, that urban ag farmers need to be counted in the census. Right now we're not, and so as a result, we don't get any money. Lands in city need to be designated and protected specifically for urban agriculture. I live in New York City, and again, it's a struggle to continue to fight for land preservation and protection. Money that the NRCS gives for greenhouses needs to be also, and irrigation needs to be extended to urban farms and community gardens. Each state must have an urban ag department. I like to see that, along with the extension agents. We have an extension agent, I don't know where he or she is, but it needs to really come into the cities and stay out of only rural areas. Money needs to be available for loans and grants through the Farm Credit Union and the USDA Farm Service Agencies. Right now, we don't get that money, and I think that money and grants need to happen in urban areas. For me, this is very personal. Siphon at least, and to pay for all this, siphon at least 1% of asset forfeiture money from the Treasury Department that goes towards policing back into communities hardest hit by drug violence, towards urban gardening and urban farming programs, okay? As well as Community Reinvestment Act, which the banks, we bail out the banks, well, the banks need to reinvest that money, and that money needs to go into urban farms and urban agriculture. Also bring back the community block grant. Again, these are money that can be funded for urban agriculture and farming programs. Help create micro food hubs in most impoverished neighborhoods that lack supermarkets and create an economic food economy based on entrepreneurship rather than charity. These food hubs can be equipped with infrastructure such as commercial kitchens and refrigeration. Promote urban and rural farm alliances in terms of forming cooperatives. Use our waterways and our railways as modes of transportation to deliver fresh food to inner cities instead of trucks. I live in the Bronx, and so the mode of transportation is trucks, which contributes to a high incidence of asthma. Those railroad cars, as well as the trucks, can be used in terms of for farmers markets and other modes of transportation, such as floating barges. There needs to be a fair and balanced idea when it comes to urban agriculture. We have seen millions and millions of dollars being put into commercialization of urban farms and money being left out to people who have lived in inner cities, such as our community gardens and urban farms. I've been there for 28 years. I've been there for 28 years, so we have to make sure that that money does not go into million-dollar corporations and have them giving free land and huge tax breaks. Last, we need to have incentive programs. Like in New York City, we have the Farm Roots and Farm School programs, which has helped me as a urban farmer transition to a rural farmer. We need to promote value-added products. Like in the Bronx, we have the Bronx hot sauce, we have Bronx honey, we have Bronx eggs, we have Bronx chickens. All of this is done with people who have any money. We did this among ourselves. And also, last but not least, we need to have an urban ag website for information regarding events, resources, grants, loan, partnership, pest management, recipe, land access, legal information, composting, food safety, webinars, and etc. I am here. I've been waiting for 28 years for this to be happening. It's about time. So hopefully, we want our fair share. And I want to say one last point, is that we're not here to displace rural farmers. We're here to get a piece of the pie and to work together to make sure that this food system is all about being inclusive and the fact that everyone should have access to food that is local, healthy, and safe. Done. Sorry about talking fast. I get my points in.
A vibrant ending to all of you staying within 5 minutes. Thank you very much. Now we can move to questions. So let's see what we have coming up. So 8 votes. The Cleveland Land Bank has been instrumental in securing land for equitable access and use. Do you see land banks and our land trust as critical to promoting equity and land access for black farmers?
I mean, duh. Yes. I mean, not only, but land in general. As we speak now, land continues to be displaced in black communities. Black farmers continue to lose their lands. So the point is not about forming a land bank, which is all well and good, but the fact is that how can we make sure that our black farmers continue to have the land that have been in their families from years to years to years?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I would pick up on your comment earlier. It depends.
Right.
I think, as you said, it depends what the implementation looks like. It depends how the regs are written. I mean, it's a first step. You're protecting land, but who gets access to that land? Are there city policies put in place to make sure that residents who have been there have equitable access, or even have set-asides, as I said, to make sure that that really truly it can be the benefit of the folks that are living there?
So first I want to distinguish a land bank and a land trust are not the same thing.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So in Detroit we have what's called the Detroit Land Bank Authority, which is a quasi-governmental agency which is only minimally accountable to the government, to the people. But Detroit is a very unique situation because democracy was severely compromised in Detroit with the imposition of an emergency manager and with the bankruptcy of the city. So we have a situation which is unlike any place else in the United States. So we do have a land bank, but the policies of the land bank in regard to urban farmers, I think, are still somewhat unclear. There's still some struggling going on around how that land that is in the possession of the land bank is going to get in the hands of farmers. However, we are very supportive of community land trust. Mm-hmm. We think that unused land in places like the city of Detroit should be put in the hands of residents to democratically and collectively decide how that land is used. And in some cases, people might decide they want urban farms. In some cases, they might decide they want other kinds of green spaces or housing or other development.
Right. Thank you. So what's risen up here now is how does gentrification impact the effect of urban agriculture on a community? And I think you've all experienced this in various ways in your communities.
Yeah, so I live in New York City, I live in the Bronx, and this is sort of the last borough that's trying to prevent that from happening. Mm-hmm. We have to be very, very careful. Again, people feel that in inner cities that people need to come in and fix things, and we don't need fixing. What we do is really need is resources, and so for those people that want to come into our city, you need to work. You come from a place that you want to work with us instead of trying to come in and displace us. And that's one sort of negative thing out of gentrification, is that it displaces the people that have been there. So we have to make sure that there's sort of communication and education, but is that people understand the implications when people with money and power come into neighborhoods and they displace people. We're in the Bronx, we're at the door, preventing that from happening.
Hmm. And I think just to go back to what you were saying earlier, this notion of land trust, a land trust in a community could actually go a long way to helping to prevent some of this fallout from gentrification that occurs in communities. Do you think that's?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, I mean, there's been examples in Detroit of how urban agriculture has helped to spur gentrification. One example in particular is in what formerly was called the Cass Corridor. There was a community garden for many years, and a pet store moved in largely as a result of the vibrancy that the community garden brought back to the area. The pet store decided they wanted to buy the land next to them that the city owned, that the community garden was operating on, and there was a huge struggle. Ultimately, the city council sold the land to the pet store. So in that sense, the urban garden almost brought about its own demise because it brought this vibrancy, these new businesses. So the problem with that, though, is often urban agriculture is seen as a temporary use of land. And so I think we need a little more foresight into how we incorporate urban agriculture into the long-term development of cities.
Okay, good. So where does the panel suggest there are urban agriculture jobs that pay a living wage? And maybe urban ag goes beyond just production per se to value added and other kinds of things.
As a rural farmer, I'm still struggling to sort of make ends meet. So this is across the board. It's not only in terms of urban farmers, but in terms of rural farmers as well. And I think we have to sort of think outside the box. I know you just can't make money just growing food, but you have to find innovative ways how to bring your product to market. It's not only about farmers markets, CSAs, but also doing farm tours, doing creative things, having weddings, doing things that normally you would not do, because, and also bringing in technology. This is going to be a problem for the young farmers coming into agriculture, and something that we have to think about. How can we, across the board, increase our profit from growing food that is supposed to be good, local, and fresh?
I think this is a place where some of the controlled environment growing can be interesting, and certainly when you have a very short season, it makes it harder to sustain a farm that can have profits that can really employ people to be able to pay them a living wage. So I think that's one of the spaces where thinking about how to bolster controlled environment growing inside of warehouses. I also think, this comes back to the point I was making about food security, which is, if these urban farms are expected to be giving their food away as their primary goal, or having very, very low cost food, unless it is bolstered by funding from city governments like we have done in DC with the Produce Plus program, the best thing I think urban farms can do is sell that food at a high price to whoever wants it and employ a lot of people with the profits that they're making, so that they're able to pay a living wage. I know it's a fine balance, but I think we don't talk enough about that.
Mm-hmm.
So just to be clear, I think capitalism is a really rotten system, and I know lots of people don't agree with that. Some people do, obviously. So I think the central dilemma facing the food movement is the question of how we provide access to high quality food while at the same time paying a livable wage to people working within the food system. Mm-hmm. And frankly, it's very difficult within the context of capitalism to meet both of those conditions. As Karen said, most rural farmers are not doing that. Most rural farmers are working an outside job in order to kind of be able to keep the farm and stay on the farm. So it's a very difficult equation to work out. But we do know that the majority of the value, the economic value in the food system, are the layers between the growers and the consumers. The growers aren't really making a whole lot of money, and the margins are pretty thin at the retail level, but there is room for growth in those middle layers with the washing, packing, processing, creating value-added products, and I think that's where we need to focus a lot of energy.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. Well, just one, it's not the top vote right now, but I want to get it out there. Can Karen Washington Share publish her bullet points? So there you go.
I will.
So I would just say to remind everybody that these are all being taped and they will be up. But I would actually ask all three of you, because you all had some wonderful bullet points about things that need to be in there. If you could actually, if they're not written down, if you could write those down and send them into the Institute here, I'm sure they'd put them up on the website and be great fodder for the Farm Bill itself. So let me back up one it's bouncing around a little bit. What kind of role can college students play in promoting food equity in their campus community and beyond?
Well, I think there's some good efforts going on here at George Washington University and at campuses throughout the country And one of the organizations leading that has been the Real Food Challenge. And so certainly students can advocate for their college campuses buying food from local producers and not getting locked into contracts with these huge multinational corporations. Campuses can have school gardens, as many colleges are doing now. There can be programs that involve campus-wide composting, serving food that's grown on local gardens on the campus in the cafeterias. Those would be some of the things that students can do to start.
I mean, and this is a pitch for DC, but I mean, there are so many organizations that you can get involved with in DC, DC Greens being one of them, but places where there really there's the need for sort of foot soldiers on the ground to be, to help to build the equitable food system that we're working on here. I also think, listening, learning in your campus life, but going out and listening to the voices that are leaders in your communities and letting yourself be a student in the world and not thinking that you're going to come from your institution and go out and be a leader in the world immediately is a very important, I think, piece of humility that's necessary in being a support to an equitable food system.
And also, when you have workshops and seminars, always remember who's in the room and who's missing and who needs to be there.
So I just want to add one little thing on my own, if I could, since I've been a college professor now for 30 some odd years, whatever that says. And that is, I think, one of the things that we can help college students learn to do is to listen. Because people like yourselves and other people in communities, people of color, have lots to teach, especially college students who come from white privileged backgrounds. And I think one of the hardest things oftentimes for these students to do is to learn to sit down and listen and try to not put themselves in somebody else's shoes, but to listen to what's in those shoes. So I'll just throw that out there. I think we have time for one more thing, and I want you to twist this question however you want to. But white-led NGOs dominate access to urban ag resources in many communities. What can those NGOs do to truly engage black growers and become partners, not competition?
I would say in communities that are majority black, they need to be trying to see how they can turn over that responsibility to the people who live in that community. And so not just being partners, but really, the role of a nonprofit is to serve the community, not to serve itself and get bigger and bigger and bigger. And so really the idea is to empower the community that they're working in. And since we only have a little time, I do want to say this. And we want to make sure that in this next farm bill, see, the question is, where does the funding come from? The bill looks great, but where's the funding going to come? So we want to make sure that we're not taking it from SNAP benefits as happened in the last farm bill.
Yes.
In fact, those benefits should be restored. And also we want to make sure that the funding doesn't come at the expense of rural farmers.
Do we have time for me to jump onto
Please
that
do.
question?
Yeah, please do.
As
All of you too.
a white leader of a nonprofit, I think it's a great question, and I think that what I certainly try to do is recognize the power and privilege that come, unfortunately, with the fact that I am a white woman, and be a conduit as much as I possibly can between the access that I am afforded and the community that really should be the ones having that access. So that is about making sure that folks are have the same levels of access to funders, to policymakers. It means employing people who are from the community and using the fact that I have the power of a nonprofit with jobs to be able to extend to people who are living the realities that we're trying to serve. So, I mean, I think those are a few ways. And I think there's a lot more work that needs to be done. I think that this conversation needs to continue to be happening among nonprofits across the country in relation to the communities that they serve. So thank you for the question.
I got 2 points.
Yeah, please.
Give up your resources and give up your power.
Yeah. That's it.
I think on that note, we're at a little bit after 11, so I want to thank Malik and Lauren and Karen very much for your time and for your thoughtful responses. Thank you so much.
You.